morning to all of you. Welcome into the Daily Deep Cut, brought to you by the Beat Sessions. I'm your host, Mitchell Weary. Glad to have you all aboard. If you're not familiar with the show, kind of a brand new concept that we're working with here in 2025. Seems pretty straightforward. Picking out a Daily Deep Cut every single day with a focus theme. This week's theme, classic rock from the 70s. The song that we're talking about today, barely making it. We were only about 11 months into the decade when the Kinks put out Powerman from the album Lola versus Powerman and the Money Go Round Part 1. As you all know, or as many of you might know, there was never a Part 2. We'll get into that in a little bit here. It's a fascinating record, though, one of their best, and this is a band that I've always felt is just so underrated, and a big part of that had to do with what we're going to discuss first. And I think it's important to discuss this because it's incredible that this band was able to have the success that it did based on the circumstances. And not even just, I mean, these guys flourished. They put out their best body of work. I think most people, would, including myself, would argue during this period of time. You get 1965 rolls around. You have the British invasion, the Beatles, the Stones, everybody coming across the pond, touring in America. And these guys were over here doing their thing. And there was enough that eventually led to them being kicked out of the country and not being allowed to tour for 4 years. A ban, amongst many other things. I think their quarrelsome behavior on stage was a big part of that, but there certainly were were other issues as far as just the complexities of the music industry and them not just putting up with any of that. There was just not many recording companies, booking agents, anybody involved in the touring process was basically like, get out of the country. And so what I dig about this period of time for the band is that they go back to England and they do their own thing. They're very well known for their early garage hard rock sound, almost punk. And I mean, it's one of the things that made me fall in love with the Davies brothers, Ray in particular, the main songwriter. I think that early sound is something that I appreciate and I'll always adore it, but I love the shift and the open as far as what was driving the influences of their sound and the way that they grew as artists. Reminds me a lot of The Clash and what The Clash did throughout their career. Labeled a punk band, but so much more. Such a bigger outfit when it came to the influences that were driving their sound. And so this band, by the time they get back to England and they start this period of time where they're not allowed to tour in the U.S., they put out Face to Face in 66, Something Else by the Kinks in 67. They put out The Kinks Are the Village Green Preservation Society in 68, Arthur or the Decline and Fall of the British Empire in 69, and then we get Lola versus Powerman and the Money Go Round Part 1 in 1970. And basically just capping off, again, the best period of this band's existence with those 5 records. And I love that Lola versus Powerman it's a satirical poke at everybody in the industry at that point who basically tried to block the success of their career, anybody that was trying to hold them down. And versus, quarreling with each other, going at each other. If you're familiar with the Davies brothers, you know that they make Noel and Liam Gallagher, just look like two puppies in a puppy store basically going at it in the window. It doesn't even come close to the antics that these guys pulled on stage, off stage, throughout their career. It's amazing that this band lasted until 1997. That's another thing I got to add. I like just the ability to go for a little over 3 decades, given the relationship dynamics, is impressive. But I love that this was a concentrated, focused effort to take all that pent-up energy, all that angst, and to direct it at the people who deserve to hear it. And it's one of the best things about this record. It's one of the best things about the track Powerman. It's unfortunate, given that it's in the title, that it doesn't receive the visibility that it should. But I do love that it serves as the penultimate track on this record, right between 8 Man and Got to Be Free. 2 songs that, I love 8 Man. I love the kind of calypso feel to it. The islandy influence, a big drive from Caribbean influences on that track, and it makes sense. Ray's talking about wanting to escape and go to an island and be free and live like the ape man, and Got to Be Free closing out the record. More of that direct, hey man, like we're not going to take this crap. We're going to do what we want to do on our own terms, and as every artist should. I feel that one of the biggest threats to any type of artistic creativity are the powers that be, and the deadlines that start to stack up. You need a hit single, all the stuff that goes along with that. Even though on this record we do get a song like Lola, which probably the band's biggest single, a song that in a lot of ways doesn't really fit into the context of this record being a concept record, but I think the story with the Coca-Cola line and having to go back to Cherry Cola does suit the overall theme of this record, as far as these guys literally having to re-record for the single because that was trademarked. Coca-Cola didn't have Coca-Cola and the record companies. No one had a problem with the fact of what the song was actually about, but they were upset that Coca-Cola was referenced in it. So I think it fits in there in that regard. But this album, if you're not familiar with the album in general, before we get into Powerman, I mean, such an incredible collection of songs. Amongst that, Lola. I think the two openers, The Contenders, Strangers, written by Dave Davies, an excellent song. I really love the way The Contenders opens too. It kind of reminds me of the way the Powerman opens a little bit. You kind of get these like loose guitar notes, and then the electric riff comes in. And I love that there's a number of tracks on this record that deliver that hard rockin' sound. But again, there's that balance of folk, of Baroque, like all the different influences that this band started to play with around the late, I'd say around like 66, 67 with their music. But, Denmark Street, the third song, is a fantastic track as well. But then you have Lola, the song that kicks off the B-side, This Time Tomorrow. If you've seen Darjeeling Limited, I love the use of that song in that movie. It's fantastic. You have Rats, Ape Man, and then Got to Be Free. I mean, just such a phenomenal collection of songs that Powerman gets to be a part of, and it could be part of the reason why it does get overlooked. But I think at the end of the day, serving as the penultimate track and really going at the publishers, unions, the press, business managers, life on the road. There's all of these songs have in their own way captured and singled out all of the entities that I just described. But I feel like all of these entities are below and subject to the Powerman, which is why this serves as a solid penultimate track. And just turning their chaos to their advantage. Again, I think the concept of this record resonates with so many artists at the time. And it's interesting going back and looking at modern reviews. A lot of people critical of this record, especially the track Lola, now that we live in 2025 and everybody's so sensitive. No one can take a damn joke. But it's I think this is a record that holds up extremely well, and I think you talk to or just read interviews, listen to interviews with the majority of artists that were around during this time that were influenced by this sound. I mean, Pete Townsend from the Who, you do have The Clash, you have guys like Tom Petty, all these different artists that really consider the Davies brothers, Ray especially, to be some of the best songwriters for that period of time. Just really a unique sound. And that's another thing that I wanted to point out about these guys. Powerman, a great example. Lola, a great example. I would say Lola is probably the most iconic example of the guitar sound that these guys created. And on that particular track, combination of a Martin guitar and the Dobro resonator, but just a brilliant, iconic, distinct sound from that song. But I would say across their catalog, you get such good tone in all of their instrumentation. One of the things that makes their music so special. I really love the addition of John Gosling on keys for this record. It's on this particular track, Powerman it doesn't feature a ton of organ work, a ton of key work, but when it does come in, it's perfect. It's right there in the backdrop a little bit, has this drone-like effect. and I think his contributions are super well done. The the acoustic open on this thing is like, I love the kind of like dissonance, the bending in those notes. It almost starts off in its own unique signature way, that light electric guitar that comes in. And I really want to talk about John Dalton and Mick Avery. Dalton on bass, Avery on drums. The moment that little open kind of cedes to the rhythmic drive of the guitars, from the moment that rhythm comes in, it is just driving and powerful. Powerman, powerful. It all matches up. It all syncs up so brilliantly. And from start to finish, this thing is pretty much just going to give it that hard drive. There isn't a whole lot of variance. There's a middle eight in the song, and the lyrics of the breakdown, I can't help but chuckle about them a little bit, because it's there's definitely some heavy examples of the Powerman that are mentioned, and certainly when you think about time and place, 1970, not that far removed from World War II and the threat that existed there. So it's kind of a trip to think about that time frame, to think how close you still were to the potential of the world being very different because of the Powerman. So I love those references there. And if I was in the music industry, I'd probably take that as a pretty hard slight too. And you know what? Those people should feel slighted, because it's everything. It's, even just from the, all the way down to the people selling merchandise. And I'm trying to think of which, you got Denmark Street. It's one of the things I love about that track. It's like, you don't know the music, but you know a pound when you see one, selling shirts, selling stuff. Davies talks about how, Ray talks about how, everybody's your best friend when the music is selling, but when it's not, it's good riddance. It's goodbye, farewell. And so getting into the lyrics on this thing, talking about that open, you get that acoustic guitar, that dissonance, that just bendy note, that it gives it this ominous edge. And then the electric guitar comes in behind, the guitars find their groove, and then the rhythm hits. And then the lyrics go, I know a man, he's a powerful man. He's got the people in his power in the palm of his hand. And like the flow of the words there too, just reading it, it sounds even better with the up-tempo drive of the song. But that right there, it's not necessarily just about what he's saying, but it's the way he's writing it. It's the words that come together and how they play off your tongue. And I just want to read it again because it's so smooth. I know a man, he's a powerful man. He's got the people in his power in the palm of his hand. So good. He started at the bottom and he worked his way up. Now he's never going to stop. And that's a great reference right there too. I love that most of the powers that be, not all, especially if you go, across the pond back to the UK, you do have a long tradition of an aristocratic class. And you have that here in the States now too, obviously. You have, I would call like the Bush family an aristocratic family, so to speak. It's a reference to a number of people though that do come from humble beginnings and they work their way up, and they forget that. They forget about where they come from and who they were before, all of the hard work that they built themselves upon, became overshadowed by their greed and by their, total desire to just take over the world. Real quick too, to drop off from the lyrics, I think that's a fascinating thing about why part 2 never existed. Ray talks about how, the concept of that record is how, you become your own worst enemy. And actually there's a really good, I just want to pull up his verbiage here because I really enjoyed the way that he phrased it and what he had to say about it. But he goes, Lola versus Powerman was good versus evil, obviously. And in volume 2, I sketched out how you become your worst nightmare, how the good man goes so far, he becomes the evil person he always fought against, which it's a fascinating thing for him to say because, I don't want to say that the Davies brothers were evil, but they certainly at times were their own worst enemies. So I think, it would have been great to have seen that effort. It's unfortunate that it was never realized, but, he goes on to say we had other tour, we had the RCA deal, which they weren't happy with, and we had other recording projects that we had to work towards, and it got lost, unfortunately. It happens. Sometimes artistic ambition can, it can be it can be great in the beginning, and then you commit to actually trying to carry out what it is you set out to do. And I I think of Sufjan Stevens, and the Illinois record, such an iconic record from the 2000s, and to think that he was going to make 49 other records. I remember reading that and hearing that for the first time, and I was just like, there's no way. There's no way that you could make 49 other records of that quality, of that stature. I mean, you could try. I mean, there's plenty of artists that have that many records in their catalog, but certainly is a lofty goal. And I'm happy that Stevens just put out that record. I think that is a phenomenal album, and I think there's the Michigan record too, which didn't perform quite as well as the Illinois record, but it's just fascinating, the idea of how someone who was once essentially good does become their own worst nightmare, and how they eventually become part of the evil that they fought against. I don't want to nitpick too much, but there's this commercial recently, and I can't even remember what it was for, because they're just working in the bar. There's rarely sound on, when we have Sports Center games or stuff up there. But there's this commercial. I see Gwen Stefani, Travis Barker, and Billy Idol in the commercial. And all of these artists are people at one point in their career that I felt, were very outspoken against this type of commercialism. All of them pretty much coming from punk rock origins, no doubt, certainly very pop driven and driven by a number of other sounds, but there's a punk influence to their music. And so it just makes me laugh. I think that, I don't want to be too critical of them, because who am I to judge? I mean, if I had the same opportunity to keep putting money in my pockets to make sure that I was okay, I would do it. But there is something about that I feel tarnishes legacy a little bit, and it's unfortunate. And I think that's one of the things about the Kinks that it ultimately led to their demise of their career. I think the deal with RCA folded because they kept trying to throw concept records out there. It was stuff that was hard to market, and good for them. At the end of the day, who cares about the record companies? Who cares about album sales? They were trying to just make the art the way that they wanted to make art. Lola is an example of the opposite there. I would say, definitely set out to make a single with that track, but for the most part, their efforts really have been geared towards wholeheartedly developing records and songs and a sound that was just them. That was just a reflection of who they are artistically. So we'll get back to the lyrics here. He started at the bottom, worked his way up. He's never going to stop until he reaches the top. And again, there's that word flow there. It's so good. It's the same old story. It's the same old dream. And that's where I love Gosling's organ starts to come in. It's very drone-like. It's just this like single note, and it starts to build with that. It's Powerman, and all that it can bring, and then it subsides, and then it's just like back to that driving riff and letting that rock and roll be the focus there. If you want your money, you better stand in the line, because you'll only end up picking up nickels and dimes. You call him names, and he sits and grins, because everybody else is just a sucker to him. I mean, and there's certainly something to be said about that. I'm sure the powers that be listen to this record, and they're like, thing's going to sell. Good for us. There is that irony there that is frustrating, and it almost kind of feels like, in a way, your work is being undone, but you still got to say what you need to say, what you want to say. And he's got my money, but I've got my faith. Powerman, I'll never be your slave. And I think that's probably the quintessential line right there. The heart and soul of this song. He's got my money, but I've got my faith. And Powerman, I'll never be your slave. I'm never going to write music the way you want me to write music, or, I'm never going to do this or that, doing things on my own terms. We talked about that yesterday with Pink Floyd and Fearless. It's not always easy looking up the hill and facing the daunting task in front of you. But if you want, I'd argue, if you want to, reflect on your life fondly towards the end of it, when all is said and done, those are the types of moments where you can look back and be proud that you didn't just go with the flow, that you stood out, that you put your foot down and did your own thing. And I appreciate that. It's the same old story. It's the same old game. You get that refrain there. It's Power Man driving me insane. And then you get this middle eight. And he goes, people tried to conquer the world, Napoleon and Genghis Khan. Hitler tried, and Mussolini too. Just throwing out some mean names. That's where, I love this song too. It's, like these guys are mad at the powers that be. Throw down some of the most awful people that ever tried to manipulate and dictate how things should be, and make that comparison. I think those people are deserving. Power Man don't need to fight. Power Man don't need no guns. Power Man got money on his side. And it takes a quick turn to acknowledging the fact that, yeah, money is certainly power, and especially in an industry like the record industry, it can go a long way to control artists, to manipulate them, to shut them down. I mean, entire careers have been dictated in this fashion, and it's unfortunate. But Ray calling it out, loving it. And there you get that organ build throughout the back of the song. Again, drone-like, get a little solo to finish this portion of the song. And then it goes right into the third verse. Well, I'm not rich and I'm not free, but I've got my girl and she got me. He's got my money and my publishing rights, but I've got my girl and I'm all right. Got my freedom, got my girl, got my music. Life is good. The simple things, It's easier said than done oftentimes, but I appreciate the sentiment for sure. And she's going, and she got me going, and she keeps me sane. But Power Man, got my money on the brain. It's the same old story. It's the same old game. Power Man, driving me insane. That's how this track wraps up. Phenomenal penultimate track. I'll say it again. I think that this record is more than iconic, just because of its iconic single. I think the most fascinating and captivating thing about this record is, these guys satirizing the industry and turning their chaos, their frustrations, their struggles back around to their advantage, actually taking a moment, of a plum and really focusing their efforts in a way that they could be heard. And especially being able to tap back into the American market at this point in their careers, it's it's a wonder that the Kinks really did survive this, and it's a wonder that here stateside that we really got to know and appreciate the band. It's fortunate because at any point during this stretch they could have been lost. And who knows what the Kinks would have looked like in America at this point. I think with streaming services, access to music, it would have been easy now in this day and age, but there would have been, generations that would have been lost on this band. One of the greatest bands, I think, that ever did the damn thing through the 60s and into the 70s. Woefully underrated, so influential, and Powerman is a song that falls into that category as well. It's not as known as it should be. And if you're not familiar with it, I definitely would recommend checking it out. If you have heard it, if it's one of your favorites like it is for me, I would say go give it a listen today. Give the entire album, Lola vs. Powerman, a listen. And tune in later tonight. Got a special edition of Classic Wax on this January 8th. Kind of breaking the rules a little bit, but I'm breaking the rules for someone that that definitely deserves it. So tune in tonight at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And until then, I will see you next time.